Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, folks. Once again, welcome to our joint webinar with Sumo Logic, Amazon Web Services, and our partner Coalfire on continuous compliance in the cloud. You'll hear today from industry thought leaders on this very important and exciting topic. I will go through a few bookkeeping items for the first 2 minutes or so, and then pass it on to our first speaker this morning. For the agenda today, I will make welcome and introductions. Amazon Web Services will talk about security and compliance in the cloud and what that means in terms of shared responsibility of the security model. Coalfire will share some best practices around auditing cloud-based environments. And finally, Sumo Logic will spend some time talking about security analytics and its role in the area of cloud compliance. Just some housekeeping items. Today, attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. Any questions that you may have, you could type into the chat window, and you can ask them at any time, but we will spend the last 15 minutes of the webinar trying to answer those questions. This webinar will be recorded and will be sent to all participants. And please, at the end of the webinar, we encourage you to answer a single survey question that will appear on your screens. I want to welcome today's speakers. We have from Amazon Web Services, Bill Shin, who is a Principal Security Solutions Architect. From Coalfire, Tim Winston is the Director of PCI Practice. And from Sumo Logic, George Gerchow, who is Director of Product Management around the security and compliance features of our product and service. And with this, I'm going to pass it on to Bill Shin from AWS to talk about the shared responsibility model. Bill.
Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time joining us this morning. We'll first move on, to this concept of beyond the checklist. And starting with security cartography. Cartography is a science of drawing maps, as most people know. And when we talk about moving beyond the checkbox, we really want to think about, actually implementing security first and drawing compliance from there. So what I mean by security cartography is that we spend a lot of time with our customers mapping security controls that AWS is responsible for into the control frameworks and security programs of our customers. Certainly most enterprise customers and most customers with a CISO or any security program at all have a control framework of some kind that they've decided on, whether that's you pull directly from PCI or you use a NIST framework, you align to ISO or something like that. We want to make sure that we have that control framework and that we're mapping in the controls where we're responsible for to the ones that you already know and love. This also means that security and compliance are familiar on AWS. So if you have a control framework already, we're not asking you to disrupt that control framework. In almost every case, the control objectives when you adopt the cloud or move your workloads to the cloud and the policies that you have in your organization, those policies and control objectives aren't changing. Right? You still want to have soundness around access control, auditing, and concepts like availability. Those things haven't changed in decades, and we don't anticipate that those control objectives will change as you move to the cloud. This is one of the first steps you should consider when starting your journey to the cloud, right? And a place where security and compliance can certainly lead the way, as opposed to following engineering or development. A quick win for security and compliance teams is instead of focusing on the controls that are implemented differently, focus on the controls that you can implement the same way as you do on premises. You'll find, in fact, most controls are quite familiar as you move to AWS or to the cloud. However, like all things in DevOps and IT these days, the focus should be on iterating quickly. Pick a few key controls where the implementation is different and pull those into a sprint. Identify how you're going to implement and measure those controls or control implementations, and then pick a few more to tackle. And as the development and engineering groups become more familiar with moving their workloads to the cloud, so will security and compliance in their ability to measure them. We really encourage compliance and security to move beyond the checkbox, to get out with the engineering and development teams and discover, basically in pairs, along with your IT people or developers, engineers, on how you're going to actually build compliance testing and attestation into the workloads that move to AWS. in most cases, even the implementation of a control doesn't change. So certainly the control objectives don't, but in many cases, the way you're actually implementing control won't change either. So for example, your applications that you put onto AWS can still use the same authentication they use today. Operating systems can still use the same builds. They can still be tied to corporate directories like LDAP or Active Directory. You can still patch them the same way. You can still install the same security agents that are familiar to you already. Here's where they do change. So for example, with AWS, instead of a traditional firewall in your existing data center, you may use security groups from Amazon Web Services. And again, the control objective is still the same, to filter network access to appropriate entities. That's kind of the control objective. The implementation of that might change, and instead of doing it on traditional on-premises piece of hardware, you might do it through security groups through the API or the management console. But even then, traditional firewall vendors, Cisco ASA or Checkpoint, Barracuda, they all exist in the AWS marketplace if you're looking to move those exact same controls to AWS. When we talk about evidence collection and automating that, that's a key difference with the cloud. Part of this is just the emergence of more automation frameworks, but because everything you do at a platform level in AWS is interaction with software, it allows you to automate really all of the compliance attestations and evidence that you gather from the platform. So as opposed to having a patch panel and a rack and a data center that you walk into, really all interactions with us are done through the management console, a command line tool, or writing your own software through the SDKs. And even the management console ultimately ends up being a proxy to the API. So every single action you take, whether that's describing an instance and getting the metadata about an EC2 instance, so the IP address, or tags on those objects like who owns it, data classification, which availability zone that instance is in, the architecture of the system, all of that will be accessible through the platform and through the APIs. And it really, auditing relies on someone putting something in an asset management system. With the management console, gathering information from the APIs using the command line and metadata about those assets is always accurate. So when we talk about key certifications and assurance programs and how to map those into your control framework, Amazon Web Services maintains certifications like PCI and ISO 27001 and FedRAMP. And these comprehensive audits we do very frequently. We also have assurance programs that conduct audits that we make available to our customers, such as the SOC 2. We have programs for assurance around things like HIPAA and CJIS that allow you to use AWS services in your architecture to align to the requirements of those frameworks. So we'll move on to the next topic of AWS, and you share the responsibility for security. So most of you who've used Amazon Web Services before have probably seen this. Essentially, that line represents the shared responsibility and kind of the dividing line between what you're responsible for and what we're responsible for. And as you move up the stack and use higher order services, certainly we take on more of the responsibility. But fundamentally, things below that line include the underlying hypervisor, the data center security, network security for the underlying network. But when you bring your workload to AWS, you bring your own operating systems, you bring your own applications, you bring your own data. And in many cases, with virtual private cloud, you can bring your own IP address space, your own subnets, your own routing tables, and your own firewall rules that you want to bring to AWS. We take care of the controls of the cloud, and you take control of you have responsibility to define the controls in the cloud. So things like application security and source code review, those still you would do the same way you do today in a very familiar way. Where we're taking on responsibility for the things below the line, we're demonstrating the control effectiveness to you through things like our audits and our certification frameworks. So I'll hand it over to Coalfire. Thank you.
We deal a lot with both risk consulting and compliance. We do compliance auditing for, you can see the list there, FISMA, FedRAMP, HIPAA, PCI. So clearly we see the broad spectrum of how people are using cloud environments. And one of the things that we've noticed in the last, even in the last year, is that cloud-based solutions are no longer exceptions. They become a normal part of our practice. So we've kind of developed hot points that we look at when an assessor jumps in to look at a new solution. Great. So one of the things that we want to understand is before we can understand the customer's risk is what is their maturity of experience with the cloud platform. So one of the things that we've seen is the first solutions we saw were pretty much what they had in the data center, but directly translated into the cloud. And then the next generation are taking advantage of features that they realized they could do in the cloud. And then, each successive generation, as they become more experienced in the cloud platform, allows them to really leverage and redesign everything to take advantage of the characteristics that AWS has. So the number one thing that we look at, and the number one failure we often see customers have, is really using access control of the cloud service management. So the Code Spaces is a famous example to everyone that they lost control of their AWS root account. Of course, totally their fault. Someone deleted all of their resources, which were their customers' code repositories, and they were out of business. So at the most fundamental level, moving the methods for having access control, role-based permissions into your cloud service level is probably the number one issue. It takes planning, and AWS provides a great set of tools and guidance, but often people are focused on the functionality and getting the move done, and not adapting and owning this whole new service function that they have. So then we look at the level of expertise in the platform. Are they taking advantage of the dynamic features? Are they, kind of which generation are they on? Because the more expertise they have, in some ways, the more we can trust them that they've made good decisions, and know more that they understand what risks and have made conscious decisions about the risks they're taking on with their implementation. Logging and monitoring of cloud services. Logging and monitoring is one of those things that stayed the same for a long time. You could collect your logs and archive them and have standard monitoring tools, but now there's a whole level and a whole new way of looking at those services. So, for instance, when people allocate new instances, or when automation tools are used, things like CloudFormation or auto scaling, are those evident in the logs? Does the customer know what they're looking for? Do they know what might indicate something is wrong? And then, of course, as Bill mentioned, AWS has done a tremendous amount of work on their security and making sure that all their services are implemented in a secure way. So has the customer taken advantage of the features that have been implemented? For instance, last week, AWS announced Inspector, which will actually look at the configuration of AWS resources and point out things that might be issues for compliance or security. Are customers taking advantage of the features that AWS and other cloud vendors have provided? And of course, there are some new challenges when moving a traditional solution to the cloud. So let's look at compliance challenges. The first is understanding, what Bill mentioned, the shared responsibility. And what we say is, if you control it, then you're responsible for it. So if it's something you can set, whether it's by a command line or automation interface or web console, then I'm going to audit it. So that includes that there's so if we look at the whole service management layer, whether it's from the console, command line, now we look at both authentication and authorization, what permissions are have. So have your standards you've established for least privileged and role-based access control, have you extended those to the new platform that you've taken on? And especially now we're looking at service accounts. So used to be an application, we get installed on a server, and you could set up a system account and leave it. But now when I'm using dynamic environments and things like auto scaling and even creating whole new instances of my solution networks, etc., managing service accounts, takes on a new meaning. I look at configuration automation. So the things are not always done the same way. So the controls, whether they're ISO or PCI or FedRAMP, were not written with the cloud in mind. So, for instance, is system patching with Windows Update or whatever the best way to do your virtual images, or should they just age out and then refresh from a current image that has all the patches apply? So often there's new ways to meet controls, and the way that it's always been done is not necessarily the best way to do it in the cloud environment. There are some things that are a unique challenge, like PCI requires network intrusion detection. Well, when the network doesn't really exist, when it's virtualized, how do you meet that requirement? And also logging and monitoring. We have a whole new set of activities that are taking place that you're required to be in control of. So how do we know when privileged access has been used through one of the console mechanisms? How can you go back, forensically and determine who did what at a period of time when a whole new image environment may have been running? And then how do you also decide what things are worthy of alerts? Because I think that what we've learned from some of the breaches, credit card and information breaches, is a lot of times there were alerts, but they were just buried in the sea of information. And the organization went weeks or months not detecting that there was a problem because they couldn't do alerting properly. So not that everything is a difficulty, so let's look at the compliance benefits of being in the cloud. So one is you're running on a compliant infrastructure, from the physical implementation to how the network's implemented and managed and monitored, the virtual machine management, security monitoring, reaction to security events. Much of the work that you would have to do has been done and done better than you would do it, with tools and manpower that you wouldn't be able to afford with your, for your dedicated application. The second is increasingly we're seeing the cloud's services that specifically support compliance and security activities, whether it's monitoring, automating how things are done. We see things like release management, application package management, access control tools, and now even auditing tools, that are there that you would not have in a custom implemented environment. Great. Let's see. Sorry about that. So I guess the bottom line and what we encourage our customers to do is to embrace their cloud platform, understand what it does, understand their responsibilities, and if their service does it, use it. Don't do your own. And now I'd like to pass it off to George Gerchow from Sumo Logic.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much, Tim and Bill. I mean, you can't have a better setup than that. So first you have Bill, who comes on board and talks about what AWS has done, which is taking them to the far extreme of service delivery when it comes to mission critical workloads and the shared responsibility model. Then you have one of the top audit firms in the planet. So Tim, thank you very much for Coalfire, talking about how it's okay to audit those workloads once they're in the cloud and what the advantages are. And then now we're going to talk about what it means to start leveraging cloud-native tools as this whole new set of functionality needs to take place once your workloads are there. So starting off with just your old IT tools. So here's where I see people really struggling once they move to the cloud is They want to take the same tools that they had in place before, and Bill talked a little bit about this, traditional firewalls, traditional IPS, traditional IDS, and for the most part, what we see is that you're going to struggle making that change. Why? Because a lot of them are not multi-tenant. They're on-premise based. They can't keep up with the scalability and elasticity of the cloud. You're monitoring things in a silo. So as our CISO Joan always says, you have a big data center out there, which is really a big server, and you have a choke point of putting a firewall and an IPS and an IDS hooked up to a spam port, and you get limited visibility. So it's not truly getting all the data you need to make data-driven decisions about security and compliance. And it's bolted on security, so security wasn't really baked in to any of these solutions, and it's just not built for what's taking place now with the richness of data that's starting to emerge out of cloud computing and software-centric type environments. So these new IT services, these are all very cloud native. Developing applications as fast as possible, which deliver rich features to my customers to where we can give them more flexibility, agility, and generate more revenue for our organization. Truly SaaS-based, and so one of the things that always kind of cracks me up is when security and compliance people kind of push back on SaaS or moving critical data out to the cloud. We've been doing SaaS forever. You've used Qualys forever. Your organization uses ServiceNow, uses Salesforce, is looking at O365 or has migrated to O365. So why not adopt these same methodologies when it comes to security and compliance as well too? Get full stack visibility. So from the infrastructure, which resides in AWS or resides in another cloud environment, all the way up to your application stack, get that end-to-end visibility and make sure it's secure by design. And the only way to do that is to have something that security was built in, purpose-built from day one. And the way that we like to refer to this at Sumo Logic is through continuous intelligence. So why continuous intelligence? As I let you guys kind of read through the slide, the biggest reason why is the rise of the software-centric business. Everybody on the planet is turning into a software company. So digital business is fueling the rise of the software-centric businesses. A new business model in which software applications directly execute business strategy, delivering differentiated customer experiences and an always on in constant fashion. So that's a big piece, always on. And service-oriented disruptive businesses models like companies like Netflix, Airbnb, Uber, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, on and on and on. These companies have that exact same model. Traditional businesses, though, are also moving from product service orientation to, starting to be more software-centric. Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Fidelity Investments, Nike, all these companies are starting to make that turn now and realizing their future exists in software, even companies like Walmart. So as such, software-centric businesses depend on greater flexibility within their IT infrastructures, which is why many rely on cloud mobile IT architectures for the speed and agility to produce products such as services that can engage customers across a diversity of desktop and mobile devices. So any application, anytime, anywhere. So as this is starting to take place, the importance of continuous innovation cannot be underestimated since we expect to be customized to each company's operational and cultural best practices. But if mastered, the payoff is really high as it represents for a new source of competitive differentiation and one that we expect will define the next generation of digital businesses of winners and losers. This is all about, if you're not first, you're last, getting there first. So now, when we exist in that type of environment and I have these dynamic hybrid type infrastructures, I need lots of data and I need to have the elasticity of that data. So something that's going to help me deliver innovation with the same exact kind of speed and confidence that I'm trying to have in my environment. So us at Sumo Logic, the way that we do that is through our machine-based learning and a concept called continuous intelligence. So what's the advantage of that? The first one is being purpose-built on AWS. So the fact that we're true SaaS means that now I can accelerate migration and operations at AWS like nobody's business. So if you're moving to AWS or you have a workload there, or if you're moving to O365, Salesforce, any of those other locations, or if you're on-prem, through our true SaaS model, we can consume that data and start learning from it immediately. The full stack visibility. So being able to discover anomalies and outliers within the full stack in AWS or on-premise. So one of the key things that Tim had mentioned is alerts get buried. So this is from my past being in on-prem infrastructures false positives all over the place. You have email alerts. Which ones do you pay attention to? Which ones do you not? He gave several examples, Target and some others out there. I want to be able to get to that needle in the haystack very quickly. So if I know that Melissa is behaving a certain way every single day and she's following due process, the minute that she does not, and then I know that someone else may be behind her credentials or she just may be doing some malicious activity within the environment. I want to be able to get to that very, very quickly and make sure that alert is meaningful and actionable. The security posture. So this is probably the biggest thing. So as being a cloud native type company, we talk about it all the time. We believe that we have the industry's most secure native cloud infrastructure in our analytics platform because we house data of some of the largest customers across the globe traversing across different verticals, whether it's healthcare, whether it's finance, retail. We make sure their data is secure, and then on top of that, we help them make sure that their environment is secure as well too. The real-time operations that's architected for cloud is massive because now you have a different set of comprehensive AWS applications and integrations. So Tim talked about this a little bit. When he mentioned things like AWS Inspector, there's other components out there as well too. CloudTrail, how am I starting to get visibility into those types of logs? AWS Config, so how am I getting visibility into my different objects within AWS and what the changes to those objects are? What are the different relationships? VPC flow logs, which is like NetFlow for Amazon, one of the hottest tools today. But it starts giving me that network traffic and how many rejects I have, what my source and destination IPs are across that environment. So if these are things that I'm talking about right now that you've never heard of, do your homework when it comes into getting AWS because they give you a lot of these rich features and services that will replace a lot of these traditional models that you use on-prem that you can leverage within their cloud native stack and then put things like Sumo Logic on top of it to be able to get that end-to-end visibility. So the industry benchmark and standards in a secure SaaS type platform. This is something that we take a whole lot of pride in. So on top of what Bill already talked about when it came to Amazon and their asset stations and some of the things that we do out there, we've gone out and gotten our own on top of it to make sure that that data is way secure. So things like Safe Harbor, SOC 2 Type 2 attestation, which is not easy to get. Our HIPAA compliance certification, which we were able to achieve last year, and we're going through another one. Our PCI DSS level 1 for 3.0. So this is ongoing. We're getting ready to go through another one as well too. So it's one of those things that we take a lot of pride in. We're getting ready to do our ISO 27001 certification as well too. So lots of things that we do on top of AWS. But it's not just enough to do that too. You also got to start looking at things across your environment. So when Bill showed that shared model, so things that we control. So a lot of things that we control out there are things like patching. So we make sure that all of our Sumo Logic cluster nodes are booted with the latest up-to-minute security releases of Ubuntu. So within 24 hours, anytime there's a vulnerability, those systems get automatically patched. They don't go through a change management process. We don't delay it. They get automatically patched. And then we do very simple things too, like every node in Sumo Logic cluster runs default deny across host firewalls, host IDS, and file integrity checking across the entire environment. So very key for us to be able to do that. You see on the list here when we talk about encryption. So a couple things to understand. So our Sumo Logic certificates are encrypted on FIPS compliant storage media in an offsite location. But all data that rests within Sumo Logic systems are encrypted using strong AES 256-bit encryption. So really important to understand what that data at rest looks like. And then all spinning disks are encrypted at the OS level. So all long-term data storage is encrypted using per customer keys, which rotate every 24 hours using key encryption key. So customers get 2 keys, we get 2 keys. So it takes one from each side to be able to decrypt that data, but those are rotated every 24 hours after they expire. And then using things like TLS to be able to communicate back up into AWS using port 443. So next, when we start talking about our PCI type functionality. So what is it that we do specifically around compliance? So I kind of laid out the framework of you have AWS, you have that shared responsibility model, all the great things they've done with attestations, all the great native services that they provide to you, things like CloudTrail, AWS Config, VPC flow logs, and then now the release of AWS Inspector, just to name a few. Then you have the capability to have auditors today who have now accepted the fact that those workloads exist out there, that in a lot of cases, and I believe in almost every single case, it's more secure, more compliant to have it there, but they go through their audit functionality of that cloud. Then we put cloud native type tools that grab extensive amounts of data using the flexibility and elasticity of AWS to continually gather every single source of data you need to make sure that cloud is compliant. And we get down to specific details around alerting and around events to be able to visualize that to our customers. So now we take that information and we build things called applications or dashboards. So this is the same as if you were in your phone and you wanted to download an app. If you use an iPhone, same thing. You want an app for Sumo Logic? Here you go. Here's an example around our PCI app. So in this case, we're looking at requirement 10. So now we're starting to gather log information across the environment. So whether it's an IDS or whether it's a firewall, if it's on-prem, if it's off-prem, doesn't matter. We take that data, we start showing you events like login failures, and then we correlate that data very, very quickly to start showing you changes within the environment and anomalies that start taking place. And we can do it all the way down to activity by user, and then we start looking at trends in behavior over time. So this is a very powerful piece of functionality called outliers. So what happens is, on a daily basis, we expect X number of failed logins. So again, let's say it's Melissa and, she's struggling with getting her password right 2 or 3 times a day, which I bet you happens, and she has 2 or 3 login failures a day. All of a sudden, that spikes up into 10, 15 login failures a day. When that happens, now I know that I have an anomaly within the environment and something is starting to take place that I need to take a closer look at. If you don't mind, please stick with the slide previous. So when that starts taking place, we take it, we visualize it, we show you that pattern, and we get down to that needle in the haystack very, very quickly. So again, it's all about taking massive amounts of data through machine-based learning. So I'm not setting that threshold. I'm not saying that I expect her to have 3 to 5 failed login attempts a day. I'm saying this is what the system sees, this is what it's learned from, and then all of a sudden she is starting to exceed that by 5 to 10 type multipliers within the environment. That's something that I care about. That's something very meaningful that I want to be able to get down to very, very quickly. And it doesn't even, this is just one example of many across the environment. Again, like we talked about before, we're also working like on a PCI app strictly for AWS that brings in all those components of those services that we mentioned earlier and allows customers to be able to visualize what's taking place within their environment through things like PCI, through things like HIPAA, NERC, FERC, SIP, FISMA. So we're starting to really launch ourselves into this space deeply. But now the biggest thing is PCI Community. So a lot of this is education, so one of the things that, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. One of the things that we've always taken a lot of pride on is starting to work with people who think the same way, are like-minded about where the future of IT is going. So we've gotten into the PCI Standards Security Council. We're a participating organization. We as Sumo Logic are actually sitting on a special interest group around effective daily log monitoring. So we are now helping affect and write the rules that affect PCI moving from 3.1 forward. Why? Well, because some of the things that Tim had mentioned before, which is you have new types of things you need to look for. So what does logging in AWS look like? Do I get them from CloudWatch, through the API? Do I get them directly from an S3 bucket? So now I have to start thinking a little bit differently, and we want to make sure that the PCI Standards Security Council sees this clearly as people start adopting the cloud. I mean, my main philosophy has always been friends don't let friends build data centers. I mean, you just move that off-prem and you start getting to the value of an application very, very quickly. So now you're going to start seeing that more and more within the regulations. In fact, Sumo Logic has been invited to be guest speakers in Nice at the first EMEA SIG presentation of Requirement 10 and what that's going to look like forward. So what does this mean to you as a possible consumer? It means that now you're getting a top-down approach. So you're getting viewpoints that affect the industry and help you once you start moving into the cloud. You get 2 trusted partners, when it comes to Amazon Web Services, who wants to be able to offload those traditional IT type environments, make things easier for you, have all those cost savings, give you all that agile type functionality that you need, that you're being pressed for, within your own shop. You have someone like Coalfire, who's always been very, very creative and inventive. So they were the first ones to adopt virtualization and moving PCI workloads to virtualized type environments. And then you have companies like Sumo Logic, which are cloud native and purpose built to be able to do this out of the box right away, very, very low friction. When you roll out these tools that are not cloud native, like I mentioned before, you are now focusing on infrastructure, managing that infrastructure. That infrastructure depreciates the minute that you roll it out. So the minute that it's put out in your environment, it's completely depreciated. You know, it's just like a car. So if Tom buys a new car, a new Mercedes-Benz, he rolls it off of the parking lot, that thing is already depreciated. Same thing when it comes with that infrastructure. And the FTEs that manage that infrastructure are now focused on administering the application and that instead of the value of the app. So now you have something that's very, very low friction that you can now start getting to the value of within 24 hours and then immediately start securing your data and making sure that that data is now protected when it's being migrated to something like AWS. So for next steps, okay, so here's where we have 3 different areas that we'd like for you guys to focus on. The first one is it's more than okay to move workloads to the cloud. So this is happening. You're not going to stop it. If you're a traditional vendor out there today who's telling your customers, or you sit in a traditional IT shop and you're fighting cloud and you're saying to keep everything on-prem, you're going to get steamrolled at some point because it's the cost savings, the time to market, it's all there. The only battle has been on security, and trust me, you know, I worked for VMware for 8 years. I used to fight this fight. It's no longer there. The cloud is more secure than your on-premise type environment. So to learn more about what AWS is doing around some of their attestations and assurances, here's a link that you can go to start investigating and seeing what they do for you. The second piece is, well, the audit community. You know, so I hear all the time, especially in finance, FIEC and all these other people, they won't let me move to the cloud. Well, some of the top audit companies in the world have already embraced this. So if you want to get more specific insights into IT and audit and compliance and what some companies are doing and how these auditors can help you, check out Coalfire and some of the resources and use cases they have. So this is definitely a company, one of the largest audit companies in the world, that's embracing the cloud and then helping their customers with due diligence to move workloads to the cloud. If it doesn't make sense for the customer, they're not going to recommend it. But it's going to be one of the areas that they're definitely going to focus and help customers make sure that those workloads, if they do get moved out, are secure and compliant. Then lastly, data-driven machine learning analytics through continuous intelligence. So you have to have visibility into those workloads once they are in the cloud. It is a whole new way of gathering logs. You know, so your traditional on-prem type solutions, non-multi-tenant, non-cloud aware, they're just not going to be able to keep up with the pace. You know, so we have customers that will go from 10 terabytes to 20 terabytes overnight, and they don't even know it. We know it, but we just elasticize around it using Amazon's infrastructure and continually do that analytics around it to where most traditional tools, you'd have to buy more infrastructure and have 6 to 8 months of planning to be able to do something like that. So for more information around that, and then how we do security and compliance around it, here's a link that you can go to get a bit more educated. And in closing, what I'd like to say, number one, is I'd like to thank Bill very much for his time before we take questions. Tim as well, too, for helping set this up and for being great continued partners. But then also, just to remember, this is just the beginning. So you'll have a series of different webinars that get more into the how, and we'll get some customers online, too, that are leveraging all this so you can hear their real-life experience as to how they've migrated some of these workloads out, what some of the cost savings have been, what some of those concerns were that were overcame around security and compliance.
Okay, thank you very much to all of our speakers this morning. We'll open the floor for some questions. We have a few minutes for questions. Please type any questions you may have in your chat window of the webinar panel. And I see one question come up. I will direct it to Tim Winston. What should we think of specifically? One or two key points around how audits in an on-prem environment differ from audits in a cloud-based environment?
I think one of the things that you need to think about is, well, one of the we're really going to look at those hot points that I mentioned. So have you the things that are new to you in using your cloud environment or using AWS? Have you addressed all the controls with those? Whether it's whether it's access control or configuration standards or any of those things. And then I think the other one, another one is, it's going to be a lot more based on evidence. So I can't go, I'm not going to need to go inspect your data center. I'm not going to need to, inspect, individual machine, lay hands on a machine and collect configurations. So you have to think about how you're going to collect the evidence that demonstrates your compliance. And it's going to be a lot more information based than in the past. So when it was more inspection and interview.
Any other questions? Thank you, Tim, for the answer there. Any other questions? Please type your questions on the chat window. It looks like we have 2 or 3 more minutes, and we can take a couple more questions. Here's another question. Tim, where do you see customers struggle the most in addressing PCI compliance as they move workloads to the cloud? Seems to be a question specifically around PCI compliance.
Right. For PCI, I think that the areas we focused on today. So, one being embracing your access control procedures and implementing them on your AWS platform. And then the second is logging and monitoring. Be sure you're logging all those privileged access and privileged activities, and that you have some way that you're getting alerts and doing daily monitoring of those. So the logging information goes up substantially. So I would expect you're going to need a plan for how you're going to deal with that new information and how you're going to deal with the increased amount of information.
Yeah, if I could add on to that just a little bit too, so one of the things that Bill had mentioned up front is being able to interact with software. I mean, that's really the key point. And as I talked about before, within the AWS family of services, there's log information available to you. It's just that most people don't know, what those are and how to get those, so it turns into fear. Well, it's all there. It's information that's consumable and actionable by you. So he mentioned security groups before as being a new level of firewall. It's there. So I make changes to those to those security groups, inbound, outbound type rules. I can log all that information and then I can visualize it using some of these cloud native tools. So just get educated a bit on what's taking place with Amazon and what some of the things that are available to you, and then do your normal due process around some of the current things that you do within your environment, and just make sure you leverage what's available to you within these off-prem type solutions.
Thank you, Tim and George. Last minute questions. We're about out of time, and I don't see any other questions trickling in, so I want to thank our speakers for this excellent thought leadership webinar and for sharing your best practices. You can always reach Bill, Tim, and George. We will share these slides after the call, and I urge you to answer that one survey question that'll come up on your screen as we close on this webinar this morning. Thank you for attending, folks, and see you next time. Bye-bye.